You felt it, didn't you? The warmth in their voice. The way their eyes lingered just a second too long when you weren't looking. That inexplicable pull between you, like something sacred had been awakened. They laughed with you. They softened in your presence. They came alive in ways even they didn't fully understand. It was real. It meant something to both of you. And yet, they left, not with a fight, not in flames, but in silence, a subtle disappearing act only the avoidant knows how to perform. One day, they were opening up in ways they never had before. The next, they were gone. You scroll through the old messages. You remember the late-night calls. You replay the moment they looked at you like you were home. And the same question loops in your mind. How could someone feel so much and still let you go? How does someone who seemed to finally get it just shut the door on their own awakening? How does love, the kind that shook something loose in their soul, become the very reason they vanish? You didn't make it up. They felt it. You saw it in the way their body relaxed around you, in the way they paused before saying goodbye, in the way they said your name like it meant something. And still, they couldn't stay. This is the paradox no one warns you about. That some people leave not because they didn't feel enough, but because they felt too much. Love didn't push them away. It exposed the fractures they buried long ago. They weren't running from you. They were running from a version of themselves they didn't know how to face. And if you're the one left behind, it's easy to think you were too intense, too emotional, too much. But what if you were simply too safe? What if the peace you gave them reminded them of everything they were taught to fear? They wanted it, but they didn't know how to receive it. So they chose the only thing their nervous system knew how to trust: distance. This is the unseen wound behind avoidant attachment. A defense system so strong, it pushes away the very thing it secretly longs for. And you were the trigger and the sanctuary, the storm and the shelter, the one they'll think about long after they've convinced themselves they don't care. But here's the question that brings the pain into clarity. If they truly felt something, why did they still let go? Why does the one who finally found peace become the first to flee from it? To understand this, you have to look beyond the surface. You have to go back, not just into their story, but into the very pattern that made them this way. The pattern that says, if I get too close, I'll lose myself. And if you've ever been abandoned by someone who felt everything and still walked away, this is what you were really up against. Not a lack of love, but a fear of feeling safe. And now, you're left holding the question their silence couldn't answer. But we will. To understand why they let go, you have to understand what closeness means to someone who was never taught that love is safe. Because for the avoidant, intimacy doesn't register as peace. It registers as danger. Not because you were dangerous, but because emotional safety was never familiar. And the human mind, especially one shaped by early relational wounds, clings to what's familiar, even if it hurts. This is the hidden machinery behind avoidant attachment. The very moment they start to feel connected to you, their subconscious starts whispering, "Don't trust this. It won't last." Why? Because somewhere in their early story, before they could even speak the language of emotion, they learned that love equals vulnerability, and vulnerability leads to pain. Maybe they had caregivers who were cold, unavailable, or inconsistently present. Maybe they were punished for expressing their needs. Maybe the warmth they craved was dangled like a reward, only to be pulled away the moment they reached for it. So they adapted. They became self-sufficient, independent, detached. They learned how to protect themselves, not with weapons, but with withdrawal. And while you offered them the kind of love they always wanted, you also became a mirror they weren't ready to look into. because loving you meant confronting everything they had to suppress just to survive. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." This, this is what played out between you and them. It wasn't fate that ended it. It was the unconscious attachment wound running the show. To them, intimacy is a threat. Not in theory, in their nervous system. It feels like being swallowed, like losing control, like opening the floodgates to a lifetime of buried feelings. They don't yet have the tools to process. So the closer you got, the more they emotionally distanced. Even if their soul wanted you, their nervous system rejected you. Here's the paradox. What felt like safety to you felt like suffocation to them. What felt like emotional connection felt like a loss of independence. What felt like intimacy felt like exposure. Raw, disorienting, and unsafe. Their brain isn't wired to fight for closeness. It's wired to flee from it. And that wiring was installed long before you ever met them. So when you reached for their hand, they pulled away. Not because they didn't care, but because caring meant feeling. And feeling meant becoming vulnerable. And vulnerability meant risking the one thing they've spent their whole life avoiding. Abandonment. Think about that. To an avoidant, closeness is a greater threat than distance. Because if you never get close, you can't get hurt. If you never rely on anyone, you won't be let down. If you always leave first, you'll never be left. This is why they disappeared even when it felt like you were just beginning. Why they shut the door right after opening up. Why they said things like, "I'm just not ready," or "I need space." Or worst of all, "You deserve someone better." It wasn't about deserving. It was about survival. Your love felt too real, too pure, too safe. And for someone who only knows love as inconsistent or conditional, that kind of safety feels foreign, almost dangerous. This is the haunting irony of avoidant attachment. They let go, not because they felt nothing, but because they were overwhelmed by everything. And the pain of confronting their own unmet needs, the shame of feeling emotionally naked, the terror of being known and possibly rejected, was too much to bear. So they chose to protect the only thing they've ever relied on: distance. But here's the thing. Avoidants don't just push others away. They push away parts of themselves. The vulnerable part. The child who once needed love and didn't receive it. The part of them that aches in the quiet moments. When they realize they let go of the one person who saw them and stayed anyway. And that is the wound that keeps repeating until it's brought into the light. What happens when you spend your life running from love, but your soul still longs for it? That's the quiet tragedy of the avoidant path. They don't walk away and feel free. They walk away and carry the weight. You may think they've moved on easily, that your absence barely scratched the surface, that you were just another chapter, closed without remorse, forgotten without effort. But that's not what happens beneath the surface. Not in the silence. Not in the stillness when no one else is watching. Because what the avoidant never tells you is this. They feel everything after you're gone. Not because they didn't feel it during, but because they couldn't process it while being seen. Their emotional system is rigged for delay. Grief on a timer. Love on a delay. Regret an echo. They miss you in the quiet. When the walls are back up, but the warmth is gone. When the comfort of solitude begins to crack. And all that's left is the echo of what could have been. That's when it hits them. Your patience. Your gentleness. Your way of making them feel safe even when they were at their most defensive. That kind of presence isn't easy to find again. But by the time they realize it, they've already built the emotional wall so high, even they can't climb over it. And here's the cruel twist. They long for connection, but feel unworthy of it. They crave love, but fear what it will expose. So they keep reliving the same cycle, wanting closeness, fearing closeness, destroying closeness, and then mourning the loss. In private, this is what makes the avoidant journey so quietly devastating. It's not that they don't feel, it's that they feel too much, but only when it's too late to express it. They replay the last words, the text they never answered, the softness in your voice the last time you tried to reach them, the way your eyes didn't accuse, they just understood. And that haunts them, because now they know. You saw them, you loved them, and they still walked away. And what hurts them the most isn't your anger. It's your silence, your stillness, your absence from the place they never thought you'd leave. They tell themselves stories to cope, that you're better off, that they weren't good enough, that they did the right thing by letting you go. But the mind doesn't settle with stories. Not when the heart remembers everything. They start noticing the small ghosts you left behind. The song you used to play in the car. The phrase you always said when things got hard. The way you never raised your voice. Even when you were hurting. They begin to scroll through old photos, old texts, looking for a sign of what went wrong, but really just longing for the feeling they didn't know how to receive. And it becomes clear. It wasn't you they let go of. It was the part of themselves they couldn't face. You just happened to bring it out. Gently, lovingly, bravely. And that terrified them. So they left. Not to punish you, but to retreat to the emotional cave they carved out long ago, where no one could see the fractures. Not even them. But isolation comes at a cost. And one day, weeks, months, maybe years later, they'll sit with that cost. They'll think about how you loved them, not for who they pretended to be, but for who they were underneath it all. And they'll wonder, what if I had stayed? But by then, you've already started to heal, to rebuild, to understand that loving someone isn't always enough. When they're at war with their own heart. And this is the quiet grief they carry, knowing they were seen, and still not being able to stay, because it wasn't a lack of feeling. It was a lack of capacity. And unless they face that wound, not avoid it, not rationalize it, but feel it fully, they'll keep losing what matters most. Not because they didn't want it, but because they didn't know how to hold it. Without breaking, there comes a moment, after the tears have dried, after the silence has settled, after you've replayed every scene in your mind, until even the truth begins to blur. When something inside you wakes up, not with anger, not with revenge, but with clarity. The clarity that says, this wasn't love that failed me. This was someone whose nervous system mistook closeness for danger. That shift changes everything. Because up until now, you might have been telling yourself that you weren't enough. That maybe if you'd been more patient, more understanding, more calm, more quiet, more soft, they would have stayed. But now, you see it differently. You see that their leaving had nothing to do with your worth, and everything to do with their capacity to receive love without fleeing it. And suddenly, the rejection becomes redirection, not because they chose it, but because your soul couldn't shrink itself forever, just to make someone else feel safe. This is where your rebellion begins, not against them, but against the pattern that taught you to prove your worth through emotional labor. The pattern that said, if they push you away, just hold on tighter. If they avoid, you must pursue. If they're distant, it's your job to fill the space. But none of that made them stay, and none of that made you feel truly loved. So now you let go, not because you don't care, but because you finally do. About yourself. You stop waiting for a text that was never meant to arrive. You stop rewriting your personality into something palatable for someone else's fear, You stop mistaking emotional unavailability for depth, and you return, not to the relationship, but to yourself. You reclaim the pieces of you that bent, folded, and twisted, just to be digestible. You remember how deeply you love, and how that love deserves a home that welcomes it, not a heart that runs from it. The rebellion is quiet at first. You don't announce your healing. You just stop shrinking. You stop explaining. You stop fighting battles in relationships where the other person refuses to even show up emotionally. You start choosing safety, not just chemistry. You start choosing reciprocation, not confusion. You start honoring the parts of you that used to overfunction in hopes of being seen. Because the truth is, you were never too much. You were just too open for someone who was emotionally closed. And your new path? It doesn't chase love. It attracts it. By standing in its full expression, you begin to feel the difference between love that exhausts and love that expands, between love that fragments you and love that invites your wholeness. And when they come back, as they often do, with those "I've been thinking about you" messages, with eyes that carry the weight of regret but no tools for transformation, you will know. You'll know that love is not proven by how much you're willing to suffer. It's proven by how much you're willing to protect your peace. You don't need them to crumble for closure. You don't need their guilt to validate your grief. You only need this truth: I showed up with real love, and I deserve someone who can meet me there without flinching. This is your turning point, your liberation, your quiet revolution against every story that made you believe you had to earn what should have been freely given. And the beauty is, you didn't have to become hard to protect yourself. You just had to become clear. Clear on your worth, clear on your limits, clear on what love feels like when it's safe. And from this place, you don't just survive the loss. You rise from it, stronger, softer, wiser, and never again willing to dim your light. For someone who feared their own reflection in your love, there's something no one tells you about loving someone with an avoidant attachment wound. It's not just the goodbye that hurts. It's the unspoken truth that they did feel something, maybe even everything, and still, they walked away. And that kind of goodbye isn't about a lack of love. It's about a lack of emotional capacity. Here's the brutal beauty of it all. People don't always leave because they don't care. Sometimes they leave because caring feels like drowning in a sea of vulnerability they never learned how to swim in. Avoidants often disconnect at the moment connection becomes most real, not because it's wrong, but because it's terrifying. The closeness awakens the very thing their nervous system was wired to avoid: dependence, need, emotional reliance. So when you love them deeply, openly, with your entire heart laid bare, you weren't rejected. You were feared. Because real love, the kind you gave, requires presence, softness, mutual risk. And that's not something they were ready to meet. Not then. Maybe not ever. But here's what they never expected: that you would survive it, that you would walk through the heartbreak, face the storm of abandonment, and come out not bitter, but awake. You see now what they couldn't see then. That love is not about convincing someone to stay. It's about choosing someone who doesn't have to be convinced. And you? You were ready for a love that could stand still when things got close. A love that didn't flinch in the face of depth. A love that didn't punish you for being emotionally honest. But you were giving that readiness to someone still at war with their own heart. Someone who confused intimacy with loss of control. Someone whose childhood taught them to be alone to feel safe. And it's not your job to rescue someone from patterns they refuse to heal. Here's the final truth, the one that will anchor you when memory comes calling. You didn't lose them. They lost the version of themselves they could have become with you. Because you were safe. You were steady. You were offering a mirror of what love could be. If they'd been willing to face themselves. But they weren't. So they ran. Not just from you, but from the transformation that love was inviting them into. That's the tragedy. Not that they didn't care, but that they cared just enough to feel everything, and not enough to stay. And years from now, when the dust settles, when their mind finally slows down enough to reflect, it won't be the absence of passion that haunts them. It will be the presence of your peace, your warmth, your unwavering honesty in a world full of pretenders. That's what stays with them. Not the fights, not the silence, but the way you love them without needing to be chased first. Because real love doesn't need a game to feel alive. It just needs two people willing to stand in the fire of vulnerability together. And only one of you showed up for that. So if you're still wondering whether it mattered, it did. And if you're still wondering whether they'll ever realize it, they will. In the most unexpected moments. In the quiet hours. In relationships that feel hollow compared to the fullness you offered. But by then, you'll be long gone. Not with resentment, but with freedom. Because the final, most powerful realization is that you didn't just lose someone. You found yourself. And nothing, not even a love that almost was, is worth losing yourself again. So you let them go. And this time, you don't follow. So if this message found you at the edge of letting go, or in the aftermath of a love that couldn't stay, don't rush past what you're feeling. Because healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering with clarity, without self-blame, and without needing them to come back to feel whole again. If this spoke to something deep in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes the words we couldn't say are exactly the words someone else needs to feel seen. And if you haven't already, subscribe for more reflections like this. The kind that don't just explain what happened, but help you rise from it. You deserve love that feels safe to receive. Love that doesn't ask you to shrink. Love that stays. And until that love finds you, keep becoming the kind of soul who can hold it fully. I'll be here when you're ready for the next truth. Until then, take care of your heart.